Once upon a time, nestled in the remote hills of an old, forgotten land, there was a small village named Elmwood. The villagers lived simple lives, growing their own food, raising cattle, and working hard from sunrise to sunset. They shared stories by the fire every night, passing down tales and traditions from one generation to the next. But there was one story that made even the bravest among them fall silent: the tale of the evil forest. The evil forest was no ordinary woodland. Its trees were ancient, with twisted branches that seemed to claw at the sky, reaching as if they were trying to escape their own roots. The forest spread like a dark stain around the village, thick with underbrush and shadow, and it was so vast that no one knew where it truly ended. But what made it truly terrifying was the thick, eerie mist that often hovered above the ground, like silent white fog that never lifted, even in the brightest daylight. This mist seemed almost alive, swirling in strange patterns and sometimes taking shapes that resembled human figures. Even in the distance, villagers could hear strange noises coming from within, whispers carried by the wind, the snapping of branches, and at times the distant howl of creatures that no one dared to name. Over the years, the villagers had grown accustomed to the presence of the forest. They learned never to venture too close to its edge, especially when the sun began to set. For as long as anyone could remember, people told stories of those who had entered the evil forest and never returned. Their tales were woven into the fabric of everyday life, a warning that all respected. Parents would frighten their children with stories of strange shadows that moved in the trees, of people who disappeared without a trace, and of eerie lights that sometimes flickered between the branches late at night. Never go into the forest, they would say, for it is hungry for those who wander. But among all the villagers, there was one young man who didn't believe in these old stories. His name was Daniel, a stubborn and ambitious soul who had grown tired of the quiet village life. Daniel was always dreaming of a future that lay beyond the limits of Elmwood. He wanted more adventure, more excitement, and above all, wealth. He had heard rumors that deep within the evil forest lay a treasure hidden by those who had once ruled the land. Gold, jewels, and precious artifacts buried long ago and never found, for none who sought them had ever returned. The idea of this treasure haunted Daniel's thoughts day and night. He would imagine himself standing before the villagers, his arms laden with riches, a hero who dared to face the evil forest and came back victorious. Each time he heard the whispers of the village elders warning about the forest's dangers, he felt his desire growing stronger. Surely, he thought, these were just old tales meant to keep children in line. There could be no harm in venturing a little way into the forest. After all, wasn't he stronger, smarter, and braver than those who had come before him? One evening, as the villagers gathered around the central fire, Daniel decided to announce his plans. "Tomorrow," he declared boldly, "I am going into the evil forest. I will find this treasure that you all fear so much, and I will bring it back. The stories are just that, stories. I'm not afraid." His words caused a hushed silence to fall over the crowd. People exchanged worried glances, and a few of the older villagers shook their heads. One elder, a wrinkled man with eyes that seemed to hold shadows of their own, looked at Daniel with deep concern. "You don't know what you're dealing with, boy," he warned. "The forest is not just trees and shadows, it's alive. It has claimed more lives than you can imagine. Turn back while you still can." But Daniel only laughed. "These are just the tales of old men. I will be back by nightfall, and I will bring proof of my courage." That night, Daniel lay awake in his small home, filled with excitement and anticipation. He could barely sleep, imagining the gold that awaited him and the look of awe on the villagers' faces when he returned. He packed his things carefully: a torch, a rope, a small bag to carry his treasure, and a flask of water. As dawn broke over the hills, Daniel set out, leaving the village behind him with a final defiant glance back. His footsteps echoed in the still morning air as he approached the edge of the evil forest, where the trees stood tall and menacing, shrouded in mist. It felt as though they were watching him, waiting. As he took his first steps into the forest, Daniel felt a chill creep down his spine. The air was cold and damp, much colder than it had been outside, and the shadows seemed to deepen with each step he took. The ground was uneven, covered with roots that twisted like the fingers of a buried giant reaching out from beneath the earth. Every sound was amplified here: the crunch of leaves beneath his feet, the distant call of a raven, and the soft rustle of something moving in the bushes nearby. He tried to shake off the uneasy feeling, reminding himself of the treasure that lay ahead. As he went deeper into the forest, he noticed something strange. The light from his torch seemed to dim, as though the darkness of the forest was swallowing it up. The trees loomed closer, their branches forming twisted shapes that looked like figures reaching out to him. Occasionally, he would see movement from the corner of his eye, but when he turned, there was nothing there. Shadows played tricks on his mind, making him question whether he was truly alone. After an hour of walking, Daniel began to lose his sense of direction. The forest was vast and endless, every tree looking identical to the last, and the mist seemed to thicken, obscuring his path. Just as he was beginning to worry, he spotted something in the distance, a faint light flickering through the trees. His heart leaped with excitement. Perhaps it was a sign, a clue that he was getting closer to the treasure. He quickened his pace, making his way toward the light, but as he approached, he saw that it was not what he had expected. There, in a small clearing, stood a tall stone marked with strange symbols that seemed to glow with an unnatural greenish light. The stone looked ancient, covered in moss and cracked with age, yet it radiated a power that made the hairs on Daniel's neck stand on end. He reached out to touch it, feeling a strange compulsion to understand its markings. But just as his hand got close, he heard a whisper. A soft, urgent whisper that seemed to come from the stone itself. "Turn back," it said. The voice was barely a breath, but it sent a chill through his entire body. He pulled his hand back, heart pounding, and looked around, searching for the source of the voice, but there was no one there. Daniel stood before the ancient stone, feeling an eerie silence settle around him. The whisper still echoed in his mind. Turn back. But he dismissed it, telling himself it was just the wind, a trick of his imagination. He took a deep breath and pressed onward, leaving the stone and its unsettling presence behind him. The forest grew darker with each step, and the mist thickened, swirling around his legs like cold, bony fingers trying to hold him back. Every so often he would hear strange noises, the snap of a twig, the rustle of leaves, and faint whispers that seemed to come from all directions. As he walked, Daniel tried to recall the stories the villagers had told about the forest, but now, they didn't seem so far-fetched. He remembered tales of lost souls who had wandered into the forest, only to be consumed by the shadows, their voices forever echoing in the trees. He had brushed those stories off before, but now, with the darkness closing in around him, he felt a twinge of fear creeping into his heart. After what felt like hours, Daniel reached another clearing, and in the center stood a small, decrepit hut. The roof sagged, covered in thick green moss, and the walls were cracked and worn. He hesitated, but curiosity got the better of him, and he approached the door, pushing it open with a creak that echoed through the still air. Inside, the hut was dimly lit by the faint glow of candles placed on an old wooden table. Strange symbols were carved into the walls, similar to the ones he had seen on the stone. Daniel's heart raced as he noticed a large chest sitting in the corner of the room. His eyes lit up with excitement. Surely this was the treasure he had been searching for. With trembling hands, he knelt before the chest, gripping its heavy, rusted latch and slowly lifting the lid. The chest opened with a groan, and inside, he saw piles of gold coins, jewels, and sparkling gems that caught the faint light, casting eerie reflections on the walls. He reached out, his fingers hovering over the treasure. But just as he was about to touch it, the air grew colder, and he felt a presence behind him. He froze, unable to move, as a shadowy figure began to take shape in the corner of the room. It was tall, with hollow, dark eyes that seemed to stare into his soul, and its body was shrouded in mist, blending with the shadows. A voice, deep and resonant, filled the room. "You should not have come here," it said, its voice a low growl that made Daniel's blood turn to ice. "This treasure does not belong to you." Daniel scrambled back, his heart pounding as he tried to speak. I didn't mean any harm," he stammered, but the shadow only laughed, a sound that was neither human nor natural. The room grew darker, and the shadow seemed to expand, filling the hut with its presence. "You entered the forest despite the warnings," the shadow continued. "You sought to take what was not yours. Now, you will pay the price." Before Daniel could react, the shadow lunged toward him, and the room was filled with a bone-chilling cold. He tried to scream, but no sound escaped his lips. The last thing he saw was the shadow's hollow eyes staring into his own. And then, everything went black. When Daniel didn't return to the village by nightfall, the villagers gathered at the edge of the forest, whispering and casting worried glances into the trees. They knew, deep down, that he would not come back. They had seen it before, and they knew they would see it again. The evil forest claimed those who dared to challenge it, swallowing them whole and leaving nothing behind. To this day, the villagers still tell the story of Daniel and the evil forest. They say that on quiet, moonlit nights, if you listen closely, you can hear his voice calling from within the trees, a lost soul forever bound to the shadows. Some claim to see his figure wandering the forest, a flickering light that appears and vanishes between the trees, always searching, never finding. And each time someone new dares to venture into the evil forest, the villagers shake their heads, knowing that another soul will soon be lost to the darkness. The forest remains, as it always has, a silent guardian of secrets and shadows, waiting for the next brave or foolish soul to wander into its depths. For those who enter the evil forest rarely return, and those who do come back are never quite the same.